Hello everyone, welcome to 22nd of the talk series for our Japan philosophy, practical methods, sausage, science, and mathematics. Today we have our last guest of this semester. He's also my fellow actor from for giving a political talk on Hegel and Levinas concept of absolute being. If I try to introduce shortly this biography before auditors will be not familiar with him. Because he was born in 1980 in Argentina. He completed his high school education, high school at Istanbul, Duality High School. He received his undergraduate degree in forestry industry and his science architecture relations. He completed both his MA and PhD in the Department of Philosophy at Galatasaray University. He's currently an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at the Hegel University. He's published recently a book on Hegel and Levinas, same subject. I think the title was in French. Absolute et Hegel and Levinas. In English, absolute being in Hegel and Levinas. He also wrote some articles on the subjects of ethics, theology, and metaphysics. For research area, we can say researches in ethics, philosophy or religion, metaphysics, phenomenology, and theology. Thank you in advance for listening and joining us.
Today, I will try to talk on Hegel and Levinas in general, I think. And at the beginning, I have to say that these two philosophers somehow have two mainly different philosophical ground. I have to first of all accept them. So it will not be easy to combine these two to some extent, but to some extent also I have to say that these two are not so different regarding their, how can I say, their way of thinking, I think. Because somehow, even if we accept that the phenomenology somehow begins with Husserl, whatever, but somehow when I look at Hegel, in fact, I think we can see the, how can I say, the main essence of that tradition of phenomenology can be to some extent seen in Hegel also. So I am not seeing Hegel too much different from phenomenology in some senses. Okay, and also this is why I am also seeing Levinas in that way, even if we know that somehow Levinas criticizes phenomenology in general, especially the phenomenology Heidegger. Somehow he continues to be within the tradition of phenomenology in some senses, okay? But even if you can say that they belong to some extent the tradition of phenomenology, they have totally different perspectives. What I see is that let me first of all make that general distinction between these two philosophers, I think. in general, if I, how can I say, define the philosophy of Hegel, probably I will say that it is a philosophy of unification and mediation. Somehow, I will try to explain all that. On the other hand, if I try to depict the philosophy of phenomenal Levinas, probably I will say that it is a philosophy of separation and transcendence. Probably, I don't know. Okay? By saying this, let me try to explain what I want to say, if you want. I hope it has a meaning. Okay. First of all, the philosophy of Hegel. Somehow it is at the beginning. It can be seen as a philosophy of critique in some sense. What I want to say? I want to say that even if in some senses we can say that Hegel belongs to the long tradition of Western metaphysical philosophy, even if we can say this, I think we can say more, and that is related with his new understanding, his new perspective, and that new perspective must be related with that concept of duality, I think. Because from Hegel, what we understand is that he criticizes that metaphysical Western tradition because of it is monism, I think. It is monism. What does it mean? Somehow that long history of Western philosophy is obsessed with some, how can I say, ultimate monist concept. For some philosophy, it becomes essence. For the others, it becomes substance. For once, it becomes reason. For the others, it becomes something else. And Hegel somehow sees some kind of reductionism in all of that history. So this is why he tries to propose something new. So this is why, what I understand, even if he does not talk too much, especially by using that concept of duality. In fact, that concept of duality can be seen, for example, in Schelling. Even if Hegel does not use that concept, Schelling uses. And Schelling uses that concept when he criticizes Hegel. Okay? So this is why at least his conceptualization of dialectic somehow implies that, in fact, he takes duality as the base of his philosophy. Okay? So this is why, by criticizing that monistic Western philosophy, somehow he tries to propose a dualistic truth, if I can say this, okay? Especially we know this, for example, from his critics against Spinoza. What does this mean? This means that by transforming existence, which can be seen as the opposite of the essence, okay? At least the Western tradition somehow sees such an opposition between essence and existence, or substance and attributes. What can I say? Okay? And Hegel thinks that by doing so, in fact, And I am generalizing, but what can I do? By doing so, Western philosophy somehow reduces everything into essence and disregards all the others. Simply, this is so. Okay? So this is why he will say that yes, Spinoza did something well. He tries to tie or he tries to relate all of that contingent, that attributes, that modes to the substance, but in fact, at the same time, he somehow transforms all of that contingent existence into nothing, into meaningless thing. So this is why I will try to, he will say that, I will try to grasp the meaning of the existence, the meaning of the contingent, the meaning of the finite, simply. Because by just accepting, by relating to just with the essence, in fact, Western philosophy somehow disregards existence, disregards the contingent, disregards the finite or the finitude. Okay? The finitude. So this is why he will say that we have to rethink the finite. We have to rethink the contingent. Okay? So this is why I am saying that we can relate Hegel with phenomenology. Because from phenomenology, what we understand is that to make philosophy departing, to some extent, departing from the contingent, departing from the finite. What I understand is that departing from the phenomenon, what is seen, simply. Okay. So this is why I am saying that the Hegelian philosophy is a philosophy of critique against Western tradition to some extent. So it is, in some sense, classical and in some sense contemporary. Okay, simply this is so. And as far as I understand, it is a philosophy of duality, and that duality, in first sense, is related with the duality of, how can I say, probably absolute and being, a duality between absolute and being. But I have to probably explain what I understand from absolute and being. And absolute, what I understand from absolute is related with that immediate being of Hegel. Immediate being. Immediate means being which does not have any attributes yet, which does not have any mediation, does not have any determination in within the terminology of Hegel. Okay? So this is why it will resemble nothing, and Hegel explicitly will say that. So the first moment of being, which is absolute, is something which is not different than nothing, because it is indeterminate, absolutely indeterminate, absolutely immediate, and it does not have any quality, any determination, any mediation, simply. Okay? So from absolute, what I understand is that. So this is why, for example, in the next chapter, I will try to relate that concept of absolute with the concept of infinity in Levinas. Okay? So from being, what I understand is not being in the abstract sense, but being within actuality. So that things separation between, how can I say, potential and actual. But absolute is not potential, but actual being. being, which is the being which we experience simply. It's not the concept of being in abstract conceptual sense, but it is being as actual. Being as actual. So it is simply a reality which we experience. Okay. So the first duality in Hegelian philosophy, or the fundamental duality in Hegelian philosophy, can be related with that duality between absolute and being. Okay? But as you know, Hegelian philosophy is not so simple. Why I am saying so? Because even if it begins with almost such an absolute duality between absolute and being, or in Hegelian terminology, for example, Geist and the negation of Geist, or spirit and the negation of spirit. Okay? Yani, I don't know. I do not want to bother you too much with some Hegelian discussions. Even in the concept of spirit, for example, in the concept of Geist. Geist is the beginning. It is the principle in some sense. But Hegel will say that, in fact, we cannot accept this as a substance. What does it mean? Yani, substance in the understanding of classical way. Because they will understand substance as something which is identical to itself, which is a rest with itself. You understand what I'm saying? And as if it is totally in rest. So this is why Hegel will say that, in fact, Geist is something which is not in rest, but it is unrest. So it is a moment in itself. Because, as you know, from classical philosophy, when they say substance must be without movement. For example, this is why, for example, Aristotle will say that God cannot move, because movement somehow they relate movement with imperfection. Simply, to be perfect, something must be identical to itself and without movement. Okay, but at the beginning, Hegel will criticize that. And he will say that yes, spirit is a substance, but it is a substance within movement. But that movement must be understood as a contradictory, paradoxical movement, because there is nothing to move within that, but even so, it is a movement. If we can relate it, for example, how can I say? For example, to understand it, probably we can relate it to the examples of desires, for example. They are movement or not movement, I am not sure. But when I look at the essence of that concept, they seem to me as if they are the movement itself. Movement without separation. And because to move, we need separation. To move, we need something and something other. And we will talk about the movement of something from itself to the other. I don't know. But in the first moment of spirit or Geist, we will not find any separation, any distinction. Even so, Hegel find some kind of movement within spirit. So this is why he thinks that he can explain the first movement of spirit, which is the absolute negation. What does it mean? In the first moment, spirit transforms into the opposite of itself, which is the absolute alienation of the spirit to itself. So as if it is infinite, it is absolute, it is indeterminate, and the opposite of it will be finite, determinate. And mediated simply, okay? So this will be the first and fundamental duality of Hegelian philosophy. But Hegelian philosophy will not simply stop in that first moment or phase. It will continue. It will continue to overcome that duality. And in fact, all of the temporality of Hegelian philosophy, in fact, has such a telos, such a purpose. The overcoming of that separation, that duality. So this is why, in fact, in one sense, I am praising Hegelian philosophy, and in the other sense, I am criticizing Hegelian philosophy. It begins with duality, but it will not end with duality. So it will try to overcome that duality. That duality will be annihilated at the end. Okay? At the end, the Geist and the opposite side of Geist, which is the negation of it, which is the method in some sense, in one sense, will be unified in an absolute manner, simply. Okay? But to reach that final phase, Hegelian philosophy will walk too much, and we will find too many different kinds of dualities. In fact, too many different kinds of dualities. Okay. But at the end, all of that dualities will annihilate themselves, and they will reach the one. Okay. So this is why at the end I will say that Hegelian philosophy is nothing other than the destruction of duality, simply the destruction of duality. The duality of God and universe, first of all, or spirit and matter. Or some other dualities, for example, the duality of God and human being, the duality of spirit and mind, or the duality of mind and body. All of that things, in fact, can be found in Hegelian system, and all of that dualities will be overcome at the end of that process, simply. Okay? So to do this, Hegelian philosophy needs an important concept. As far as I understand this concept, as far as I understand, that concept will be the concept of mediation. And if we are talking about duality and the overcoming of that duality, we need a term, because only within such a term we can talk about some kind of relation between the extremes of duality. Without this, duality will stay as duality, and it will not be different from the perspective of classical philosophy. Yani, necessary and contingent, or substance and attributes, and that duality, for example, stay as it is. What does it mean? It means that substance stay as substance from beginning to the end, and attribute stay as attribute from beginning. So this is why contingent is contingent and necessary is necessary, and there is no relation between these two. Yani as if they have no essential relation between each other, simply. So let us, for example, think about God is the essence of being, then there is some attributes, and all of that creation, that truth comes, and when it goes, there will be nothing. Yani as if all of that thing is for nothing, simply. Hegel explicitly will say that. Yani, to be able to talk about the truth of being, the truth of reality, we have to find some kind of essential meaning within the finite reality itself. In the other case, it will mean, for Hegel, that it has no meaning. It has no meaning. It has no meaning. Okay. So this is why he needs a third term, and he finds that concept of mediation. That concept of mediation. So within that ground, somehow that extremes of duality, or dualities, relate with each other, and at the end they become unified, simply. What I understand is that they become unified. Maybe to understand that concept of mediation, we need to understand some other concepts. One is negation, the other one is determination, and the other one is rejection. All of that thing somehow has close meanings. So, for example, if we are talking about that duality of essence and attributes, for example. So attributes, first of all, shows themselves as the negation of essence. Then that negations turn into the essence itself. So within that movement, we are talking about the concept of reflection, some kind of turning back. And at the end of that thing, that, how can I say, the external side of essence, that negation becomes the determination of essence. So this is why this is a play of essence with itself. So essence somehow separates itself from self, then turn to itself, okay, from this negation, and that negation becomes the determination of that thing. So this is why we are talking about attributes of something, determination of something, determination of an essence, determinations of God, or attributes of God, okay? But at the beginning it was not so. It was just the negation of God, okay? Simply this is so. But I am saying that even if that system is based on duality, the end of, the purpose of that philosophy is not a duality, but it is an absolute unification. Because at the end, that duality somehow become that duality become annihilated, and at the end we are just talking about an absolute unification of the extremes of duality. Okay. So I am what I understand from Hegelian philosophy is related to that. How can I say? What can I say more than this? I don't know. Maybe I can generally talk about that relation between finite and infinite, infinite and finite, simply. So our third term, which is mediation, will also continue to relate these two also. So finite will become finite through the mediation of infinite, and infinite become infinite through the mediation of finite. So this will mean that finite is necessary for infinite, and infinite is necessary for finite, simply. But this will mean the contextual existence of both of them, simply. So this will mean that we cannot talk about some kind of separate existence of infinite or finite at the same time. So to be finite, finite will need infinite, and to be infinite, infinite will need finite, simply. Okay? So this is why all of the Hegelian system will transform all of the concepts within itself into some kind of contextual concepts. As far as I understand, I hope I am not boring you. I am not sure, but if I am boring, I apologize. But what can I do? I am trying to. Okay. As far as I understand, that absolute contextuality of Hegelian philosophy somehow distracts the concept of essence itself. You understand what I'm saying? Yani, to be able to talk about essence, we need some kind of transcendence, some kind of, how can I say, excess or excellence, some kind of to be more, which we can relate to the concept of essence itself. If we totally transform the essences into contextual beings, this will mean that in fact there is no essence. The concept of essence must include some kind of transcendence within itself. But by being such a contextual philosophy, in fact, Hegelian philosophy dismiss all kinds of essences. And what I understand is that, I am not sure, but my interpretation is such. I don't know. I hope I am not wrong. But this is so.
Transcendence becomes immanence, and that means destruction of transcendence itself in the immanence.
Yeah. And for example, if you are talking about spirit, and if you are accepting that spirit is something totally belongs to the body itself, or it can totally be unified with body. This will mean that it belongs to the totality to the context of the body. This will mean that spirit, in fact, is not something separated, something essential. It is it will transform into a part of the body itself. So this will mean that, in fact, what is essential is the body itself, and the spirit is nothing other than a part of that contextual totality simply. Okay? I am trying to say that. Okay. So this is why I am saying that Hegelian philosophy, even if it begins with duality, it ends in the absolute unification. So to explain this, I am proposing the concept of incarnation. This is a concept which we know from Christian theology, incarnation. And especially when we see incarnation, we are talking about some kind of absolute manifestation of an essence or a substance within something else, within an alterity, within attributes, within qualities simply. Especially this is so in Christian theology. So when we are talking about Jesus, in fact, we are seeing him as the absolute in Christian theology as the absolute manifestation of God within the form of human being, within a bodily form. Okay? So body is something related with context, with attributes, with totality. Okay? So we are talking about the absolute manifestation of Spirit, God within a totality, within a context, within a body, within attributes simply. So this is why I am conceptualizing it as incarnation simply. So this is why I am proposing that we can somehow discuss Hegelian philosophy departing from that concept of incarnation simply. And I am naming this as the somehow speculative, I have to accept one, as incarnation qualitative simply. Because we are talking about the absolute incarnation of essence within qualities simply. And this will be true for all the dualities of Hegelian philosophy. All the dualities of Hegelian philosophy. I think in that way. Okay. So this is why at the end I am saying that Hegelian philosophy is a philosophy of destruction of duality. And also I am saying that by doing so, Hegelian philosophy distracts, in fact, not just one extreme, one side of duality, but two sides of duality at the same time. Okay? Yani, by unification, unification will not just destruct one side of truth. What I am saying, for example, we are talking about that duality of, for example, God and universe. If we are talking about an absolute unification of God and universe, okay, this will not just kill or just destruct God, but it will also destroy the universe. You understand what I am saying? Because I am seeing duality as the base of every kind of truth, and from every kind of truth, what I understand, rational truth, existential truth, the truth of, for example, that reality, all of that thing can be seen as truth. And all of that truth is based on such a duality, such a separation between two things which is not reducible to each other, or not reducible to something other. You understand what I'm saying? So this is why I am saying that, in fact, absolute unification is absolute nothing. So if that existence, if that reality continues to exist For me, this means that duality continues. If duality stops, this will mean that there is nothing. For me, this is so. What I understand is that. So this is why I am saying that by that absolute unification ends in the annihilation of essence and attributes at the same time. So I am saying this. Is it enough for Hegel? What do you say?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Sıfır nasıl diyor ben sana diyorum. See you. Okay. Let us continue with what?
Like you should understand.
İngilizce konuşmaktan bizarım ama I will continue in English. Unimportant. Okay. So let me continue with Levinas. So on the other hand, Levinas takes the concept of infinity as the ground of his philosophy. Okay, so this is why his philosophy, in one sense, can be accepted as a philosophy of transcendence. As we know, as we understand, Hegelian philosophy can be seen as a philosophy of absolute immanence. Absolute incarnation is nothing other than that. The absolute manifestation of something or some essence within something other. So this is immanence. Okay. On the other hand, Levinas proposes the concept of infinity. So this is why we are saying that his philosophy is a philosophy of transcendence. So what we will understand from transcendence? At least Levinas understands transcendence departing from the concept of separation and, how can I say, excellence. Separation. Fazlalık kelimesi kullanmaya çalışıyor mu? Sürplü. Surplus. Or more. Just more. Maybe excellent, I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay? So this is why, for example, he will say that other than being, more than being, what does it mean? But Levinas will use all of that concepts.
Otherwise than being.
Otherwise than being. That what is good. Otherwise than being. More than being, what does it mean? Transcendence. He begins with the concept of infinity, and he borrows that concept from Descartes. At least what he says is that Hegel was using or was understanding the idea of God in a different way. And Levinas will say that. In fact, there is something special in Cartesian understanding about God. Because Descartes will say that, in fact, as imperfect and finite human beings, we cannot have that concept of God. So this is why the concept of God is within us just as a stranger. It does not belong to us. So because it cannot be produced by our our nature, by our finite nature. So if we have such a concept as God, this means that it is there because of God. We cannot produce it. So this is why Levinas will praise that thing, and we say that that concept, that concept of God, that idea of infinity, that idea of perfection, cannot belong to us. It is in us, but it does not belong to us. So it is in us as a surplus, simply, as an exceedance, as something more than us. We have God as something more than us, simply because it is a stranger. So by saying stranger, in fact, we have to understand that Jewish implications also at the same time. Stranger. Doesn't so. God as stranger. God as transcendence. God as stranger.
What is something all that we can speak?
Yeah, as
Unspoken in Jewish tradition.
I'm not. As a stranger. As a transcendence. So this is what his famous book was titled in that way, doesn't so? Totality and Infinity, simply. So that book will take the totality as something representing the Hegelian philosophy, because Hegelian philosophy itself can be interpreted in that way, as a philosophy of totality, as a philosophy of contextuality, okay? But Levinas thinks that by integrating all of that thing, or by integrating God, or essence, or essences, or substance into such a totality, in fact, we are transforming God into a member of that totality. And this will mean that it is not God, because we distract his transcendence. His transcendence. It was a stranger, but by integrating it into some kind of totality, in fact, we are transforming him into some kind of, how can I say, it was not worldly, first of all, but we transformed it into a worldly thing. Okay? It was stranger, but it's not stranger anymore, because we integrated him into that totality. So to conserve his transcendence, we have to accept that we cannot integrate him into totality. So this is why he will talk about the despotism of rationality. He will talk about this despotism of identity, doesn't so, or the identical. The identical. Identical means same, the same, right? Same is the reason, same is the ego, same is the human being, simply. And when we try to rationally understand something, in fact, we are transforming the thing which we try to understand into the same, into the identical. Okay?
Like possession, assimilation, identification. Right?
Simply, yeah. Simply.
Process.
Yeah. It is a mode of possession, simply. It is a mode of possession.
It gives to us, our existence, something strange.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of egoism.
Yeah, so this is why he will easily label all of that history of Western philosophy as egoism. Egoism. It's not ontology, but it is ecology. He will say so. I'm not sure. I am not sure. But we understand all of that. So, the philosophy of Levinas begins with that idea of infinity. Infinity as stranger, infinity as something more than everything. Okay? But then he easily turned into the concept of the other. So that concept of the other, first of all, shows itself as the other, or the other as God. Other. God as another. Okay? God as another. But he quickly transforms or changes the focus of that concept, and he begins to talk about the other as the other human beings. And when we look at the general interpretation of the philosophy of Levinas, for example, Levinasian philosophy, we will see that, in fact, when we will see that the concept of other is interpreted as the other human beings. But in its essence, it is not the other human beings. In its essence, it is God himself. But even Levinas himself disregards that, how can I say, that changement, and how you move from God to the other human beings. What is the base of that argumentation? We don't know anything about that. And Levinas does not talk about that simply. He does not talk about that. And he easily changes the focus of that discussion, but we don't know how he does it. We don't know.
There is no argumentation.
There is no argumentation.
Yes.
Okay. How did I continue? I don't know.
That reducing of the God to human.
Yeah, I will try to say that, but first of all, I need to talk about probably that concept or that issue of creation. I don't know. Okay? Creation ex nihilo. Creation ex nihilo. Creation from nothing. Okay. It seems for Hegel that creation ex nihilo is creation of God from himself, because at the beginning God was neither. That first moment of Geist was nothing. So this is why in Hegelian understanding, creation ex nihilo means that creation from himself. But himself was nothing at the beginning. Okay? So this is why Hegelian philosophy will try to depict some kind of mechanism of that creation. So this is why at the end we will understand the absolute rationality of all of that creation. But in Levinas, this is not so. So creation ex nihilo in Levinas will be seen nothing other than a miracle, or nothing other than an absolute separation, an absolute rupture, rupture or rupture. I don't know. A break. I don't know. So this is why, how can I say, we cannot go back from creation. You understand what I'm saying? And the relation of the creation is not a real relation. So we can just understand it as a break, as a separation, as an absolute separation. So this is why you cannot follow creation. So this is why by following creation you cannot reach the principle, the substance of creation. But if we can talk about some kind of mechanism, some kind of dialectical relation between these two, we can say that you can follow creation. By following creation, you can reach the principle of that creation. But in Levinas, this is not so. As we understand creation as a rupture, as a separation, this will mean that you cannot follow that thing, and you cannot, by following this, you cannot reach the principle of that thing. So this is why, at best, we can understand creation as a miracle, as an absolute separation, So, what all of that thing means, okay? Yani, in my understanding also, I am trying to, I am talking too much. Am I? I am not sure. But, what can I do? Okay. As far as I understand, that Levinasian philosophy, or the philosophy of Levinas, can also be interpreted or understood within that ground of duality itself. Okay? I am saying this. So, Hegelian philosophy was beginning with duality. But Levinasian philosophy also, it seems, begins with duality in that sense. Because at least relating with that fundamental duality, which was related with the relation with the duality of God and universe. Levinas, that philosophy of Levinas also has such a duality, as if God and universe, or transcendence and immanence, are two totally different things at the beginning. And in Levinas, we will not also talk about any kind of unification between these two. They are two, and they will continue to be two at the same time. Okay? And so this is why I am proposing that we can also try to understand Levinas within that context of duality. But the duality is a duality which we cannot overcome, because one side is transcendence and the other side is immanence. And to be transcendent, one side must always be separated from the other side, simply. So this is why this is a duality, and this is a duality which we cannot overcome. Okay. So because of this, I am saying that even the philosophy of Levinas can be, how can I say, can be interpreted as a destruction of duality. And what I say is that because to be able to talk about duality, we need two things. But that two things must be separated and related at the same time. You understand what I'm saying? If they are absolutely separated, this will mean that in fact they have no relation. If they have no relation, we cannot call them as duality. Yani, even when we count something, if they do not have any common point between each other, we cannot count them as 1, 2, 3, 4. You understand what I'm saying? So to be able to talk about, I am saying that there must be two things. They must be separated and related at the same time. So this is why, by focusing on the transcendence of the other, as if Levinas detaches these two things from each other in an absolute manner. So this is why they cease to be a duality, but they becomes two different kind of things totally. So this is why I am saying that even the philosophy of Levinas is nothing other than a destruction of duality, a destruction of duality. And also, I am continuing and saying that by destructing duality, he does not just, how can I say, annihilate one side of that duality, but this will annihilate both sides of duality. So he tries to conserve transcendence, but that accident, that, yeah, how can I say, suitable, that strong emphasis on transcendence ends in the dismiss of transcendence, or and in the loss of transcendence. So this is why I am saying this. I am saying that by praising transcendence too much, by focusing on transcendence too much, Levinas, or the philosophy of Levinas, somehow loses the transcendence itself, because it loses any possible relation with that transcendence. It cuts any possible, the possibility of relation with transcendence. I think in that way. So, what will I do with that argument? I will try to explain or I will try to understand the concept of others departing from that argumentation. What I am trying to say. I am trying to say that. At the beginning I say that, in fact, the concept of others mainly was related with God himself. But then Levinas quickly changed the focus and began to talk about the others as human beings. Okay? So, on the basis of that argument, I am saying that the loss of transcendence in Hegelian philosophy because of that absolute separation, right, somehow urges him to find some worldly transcendences. Simply, I am trying to say. Yeah, because in his philosophy, the other human being, or metaphysical desires, for example. What was the others? I don't know. I'm not remember probably. You can find some other concepts also. Shows themselves as if they are transcendence within themselves. You understand? For example, we are talking about the other human being as a transcendence, as if when we face another human being, we are facing with the God himself, simply. And I am saying that, the philosophy of Levinas itself urges Levinas to do so, because by praising transcendence too much, he loses transcendence. So, he needs to substitute something to the place of the transcendence itself. And that transcendence becomes the other human beings. And the other human beings somehow is not simply the other human beings. We need to think this thing somehow more deeply. What I am trying to say, probably we need to look at the Jewish theology also, because the other, in some senses, implies the Jew nation itself. You understand what I'm saying? Yani, I said that yani, when we face with the other, as if we are facing with the God himself, that God somehow represents the Jewish nation itself. And you have to bear in mind all of that thing when you read Levinas. Because yani, he explicitly takes the Judaist theology as the ground of his philosophy. And we have to see this. But this will not mean that all of the philosophy of Levinas is reducible to Judaist theology. It's not so, but we have to bear in mind all of that when we read Levinas. I think in that way, and we can learn too much.
Yes, I can contribute because I'm also the expert of Levinas.
Yeah, I know.
You can count also the types of others in Levinas text, like feminine,
Yeah. Okay.
master, etc. So when he takes the other, he refers to asymmetric, not symmetric, but asymmetric relation with same and other. The other is not same to me, it's not equal to me, but it's always someone stranger or other. So if I am man, other can be woman. If I am rich, other can be poor. If I am someone, I don't know, Christian, also as you said, it is right to other can be Jews. But I'm not here, as you say, the last phrase, I agree with that. We can accept that for Levinas philosophy, the other refers to Jewish.
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah, in his mind, because he has the very, very powerful, memory of the genocide in Germany, in Nazis. So probably he thinks that. But also he has, I think, some kind of universal sort of thought.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, we can learn too much from Levinas about that concept of other and that ethic departing from that concept. We need to know that. He says something's too important for ethics itself. And also, probably I will accept that thing also. Without any relation with other human beings, probably it will not be possible for human beings to relate with God. I will also accept that to some extent. This has something to root in itself, but I am just trying to be careful when I read Levinas. Simply. But let me try to, how can I say? Yeah, let me try to summarize it. Okay, so this is why I am trying to read both Hegel and Levinas within that conceptualization of the destruction of duality. And I am saying that Hegel destructs duality within that concept of absolute unification, or the absolute, what can I say, nearness of the extremes of the duality itself. You understand what I'm saying? So this absolute unification, this absolute nearness between the extremes of duality somehow ends up in the destruction of duality. And I am saying that this will ruin the idea of truth, the idea of reality, and the idea of God universe, spirit, and body at the same time. I am saying that. On the other hand, I am saying that Levinas also, or the philosophy of Levinas, ends up to such a destruction of duality because of that absolute separation between the extremes of duality. Right? And I am also trying to relate all of that destruction of duality with the concept of incarnation. Incarnation. And, because incarnation means the absolute manifestation of an essence within something other. This is nothing other than the absolute unification of two different things. Simply, two different things. To understand this for Hegel is much more easy, but it's much more difficult for Levinas. And even for Levinas, I am talking about some kind of incarnation about that thing, and I am saying that by losing transcendence, by separating too much, in fact, Levinas needs some kind of worldly transcendences. So this is why that other human being shows itself as a transcendence, as a deity, as an incarnation in itself. Okay? So I am saying that this can also be understood as an other type of incarnation itself. And I am saying that this can be named as incarnation, essential, or essential. What does I mean? Because he talks about, for example, when he tried to talk about on the concept of face, Levinas, he will say that, for example, face must be understood as a katauto manifestation. Katauto manifestation. What does it mean? It means that being itself, or being qua-being. Katauto. Katauto. As itself. Yani as if the face is not does not have a form. It does not include any attributes. As if it shows something which does not belong to itself. What does it mean? It shows something other. Something other. Something totally strange. Something totally strange. We are talking about a manifestation, but this manifestation does not have any form, any attribute, any materiality, anything. It just shows this stranger itself. So it shows something it cannot show, simply. Okay? So even this can be or discussed, I can say, discussed through that concept of incarnation to some extent, I think, in that way. Okay? So at the end of all of that thing, I try to propose some kind of the idea of duality. Okay? Simply. And I said that a duality must be necessary. It must be separated and related at the same time, and to be so, it must be an asymmetrical duality. What does this mean? This means that, for example, we know dualities in all the religions, for example, good and evil. But we know that, for example, the God of good and the God of evil, simply. They have same power. One is God, the other one is God. This is as powerful as the other. So there is a symmetry between these two. Okay, but I am saying that if we are talking about a true duality, what does it mean? I don't know. That duality must have two sides of it as asymmetrical, not symmetrical. There must be some kind of hierarchy between these two, but that hierarchy must not end up in the reduction of one side to the other. I am saying this, okay? So I am talking about a duality which cannot be overcome simply. A duality whose two sides are asymmetrical to each other. A duality whose sides is has different levels of necessity. One is more necessary here, but this does not mean that the other side is totally contingent. It must be also accepted. Somehow necessary, I don't know, I will say that. But I think enough for me. I think enough. I talked too much. I hope.
Thank you.
I try to.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Türkçe devam edebiliriz isterseniz sorularda.
Anyone?
Zorlanıyorum.
If there is a
Zaten zorlanıyorum.
Müge Hocam, yes, please.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this philosophical talk.
I
So
hope.
it's
I
the
hope.
kind of philosophy I like, pure philosophy. So thank you very much for this also metaphysical and ontological discussion. So it reminds me of Hegel's class that I took from Johannes Fritzsche, where he talked about how Hegel is influenced by Aristotle, etc. And so I just want, I have a question, but before the question, I want to say that, so with regards to your closing sentiments, that you want an idea of duality, it must be necessary, it must be separated and related at the same time, it must be an asymmetrical duality and a true duality. I am in the school of pragmatism, and I think pragmatism fits this perfectly with regards to the relationship between an agent or a system and its interaction with the environment, because interaction itself is always, in some sense, asymmetric. There is always the context and the agent, and the context and the agent relationship is reciprocal, but it is also asymmetric. So there is relationality, and also there is room for change. But coming to my more critical so I want to say something in defense of Hegel. I don't know Levinas, but I take it that your criticism of duality must be right, based on your talk. But in terms of Hegel, in fact, so you talk about incarnation. How about emergence? I think Hegel, so you know what emergence is, true emergence of novel things, true emergence, true change, in fact, true dynamism, where something new comes into being. So you mentioned creation, but I'm not sure if that's the same as emergence proper. So we are talking about metaphysical emergence or ontological emergence. So I think Hegel's system does allow for different levels of emergence. So in one level there is unification, but there is a new level where there is a different kind of mediation or different kind of encounter, different kind of negation, and the metaphysical story continues. So it is, I would read it not as a destructive philosophy, but as a constructive philosophy where true novelty, true emergence, it allows for such things. And particularly so you criticize Hegel from the by leveraging Levinas, but in fact, for instance, this stranger idea in Levinas. So as far as I learned from you, what Levinas says, this stranger. The stranger is something you cannot, so something that you, in a way, and pardon my vocabulary, something that you can perceive but cannot interact with in any way. It is not something you can, you can negate or not negate, you cannot get into the relationship, but you can somewhat perceive as that being different, that being other. So why can't, for instance, Hegel make room for that in the, what you said, absolute? Yeah, the absolute in its indeterminate form. Anyway, so my question is on emergence and the otherness part, I don't know, that's secondary. Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't know what can I say. You are right. In Hegel, we are also talking about some kind of emergence. But the emergence, can we talk about some kind of real novelty in Hegelian being? I am not sure. Yes, we can talk about some kind of emergence, some kind of novelty, but that novelty will just be, it seems, it can just happen in two ways. One way can be the unification of two different things can cause to something other, or it can just be a negation of something existing already. Doesn't it so? How we will understand that, or to some extent we can accept it as a novelty, as an emergence, I am not sure. It seems Hegelian system somehow implies that all of the being within that truth, within that reality, somehow is implied at the beginning of all of that thing. Can we talk about something totally or something? Can we talk about some kind of anomaly in being?
Or predictable.
It's not, emergence is not predictable. Emergence is, okay, so maybe you are right, because in terms of, if you take Hegel to be inspired by Aristotelian causation, particularly efficient causation, Aristotelian causation, particularly efficient causation, you are right that there cannot be true emergence or there cannot be true novelty.
Yeah.
So emergence is another kind of causation. Emergence is not like efficient causation. In the cause and effect, and it is already there. No, with emergence, new bundle of qualities, new bundle of properties come into being, and they allow further and different encounter, different mediation, different encounter. So there's levels of. So there's a hierarchy. So I think in Hegel too, there are levels. I'm not sure, I don't know Hegel that well. I'm not sure his idea of causation, to what extent it is limited by Aristotelian idea, to what extent also Aristotle has teleological causation.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
In Hegel, we can also.
But it depends on the causation, but I think it is possible. I don't know.
But even when we talk about some kind of novelty or emergence,
Yes.
if emergence is to emerge to the being, this will mean that we cannot talk about an emerging thing which does not have any principle within being, because to be is to relate itself with being. To be is to have a principle within the being itself. So this is why we cannot talk about, I am not sure, can we talk about an emergence without principle?
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
I understand. So by principle, I take it that what you mean are norms. Principles, norms, rules.
No, I am not saying this. I am saying that.
So what is a principle?
Principle means that, to be able to talk about something as being.
As a determination.
Okay, being. Something comes to existence. This means that something relates itself to the principle of being itself. So this means that we cannot talk about an emergence without principle. In the other case, emergence will be something like that, as if there is a being which does not have any relation with being. So if we are talking about an emergence, that emerging thing must have its principle within that being. So it must relate itself with the being itself. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand
In the other
that,
case,
and I disagree.
we will talk about a being which does not exist yet.
Okay.
I don't.
So you are against the concept of emergence, because emergence is not relating to your existing being. Emergence is always within a context, within a totality, and you relate to the totality. What emerges, the new unified being that emerges, is not in relation to. So it is in relation to the context. The relationship to the context changes. It is not like from basing on first principles, some new being emerges. The relationship to the totality or to the relationship to the context changes, and the relationship to the context is what triggers emergence. So, and new norms come into being. So, what defines emergence is new norms, new level of norms, new hierarchy of norms. So, for instance, ethical norms are one hierarchy of norms. Ethical, moral laws are one hierarchy of norms. Norms that relate to truth are another hierarchy of norms, and maybe they are a simpler, more primitive level of norms. So there are levels of norms, levels of normativities, and new normativities emerge as new, more complex beings come into being. And this can be also systems, for instance, societies, for instance. Think of societies. It is not limited to living things. This is the process, the dynamical process, as it gets more complicated. But okay.
I am not sure.
Can I say something?
Estağfurullah. That's mediation.
As I know, the general, I will say something very general. Hegelian philosophy, as much as I know, it's the fuse of generality and the fuse of system, as you know. So, and maybe we can talk about it, but the role of history is very important. It's a process, you know. And I think he predetermined the meaning of the story in his system as the absolute science. So all of this emergence or events or novelty or different things could have the meaning in this telos of, which is predetermined in the system. So in this meaning, maybe we could talk about radical emergence. But I understand what it means. Radical emergence, that is, if you understand the radical emergence as something totally rupture, totally something new, absolute.
Yeah, not predetermined.
Yes, in this sense, it's there in Hegelian philosophy. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Probably it's not there. Simply.
But a very important subject, of course, emergence. And we need to that. We should think about it. But in Hegelian philosophy, it can be thinking.
For ontology, it is not so difficult, in fact. To understand this for ontology, it is much more simple. And for ontology, it is simplest. It can simply be said that, for example, if something comes to existence, this means that it has a principle within the being itself. So this is why we cannot talk about some kind of radical or separated emergencies.
And that's not the Aristotelian idea of like seed. The seed has the tree, yeah.
It's simple. For ontology, it's simple. But maybe this idea, we can think this idea related with probably with ethics. Because that question of good and evil is not simply ontological. There is something separate from ontology, and for me, for example, this is not understandable, and I cannot understand that thing. When metaphysicians or ontologists, they think on ethics, they easily reduce ethics into some kind of ontology, and they easily relate, for example, good with being and evil with non-being. Simply they equalize these two things, but this is not so simple. It's not so simple. There is something more in good and in evil, and I don't know. Maybe that emergence issue can be taught on that ground, but for ontology, I cannot say anything. I can just say that nothing can emerge separately from being. And to understand it, probably we can look at Spinoza. Being is to belong to that. I think in that way. I am not sure.
I think Çağdaş has a question.
Hocam bir sen.
Okay.
Diğer söyledi cevap veremedim. Diğeri neyse tamam. Ona da vermeye çalışıyoruz. Belki veririz.
It was a really informative and kind of a
But we don't hear very well.
it was a really informative and a refreshing talk because I didn't hear a person, like a teacher say, I don't know, that's interesting that much in the talk, and I think that's kind of a good thing. Like when you pause at places that you find interesting, that you say, I don't know, this is interesting, and I like that, so thank you. I'm going to connect to emergence because my question, I was kind of wondering, you are talking about the ontology, or are you talking about the phenomenological aspects of duality? Like, where do you situate the concept of duality in phenomenology, or are you talking about the ontological duality? Because I noticed that while we were discussing this lots of times, you said that if you want to talk about it or if you want to understand it, and that these terms kind of resembled me like terms of phenomenology. So like understanding something or being itself being at first being hidden from itself and then unraveling itself through consciousness in Hegel. So I thought that maybe that consciousness is like that mediation, where does it happen? That was my question. Because that mediation then became problematic because of that mediation and because of that circle, then duality annihilated itself in Hegel. So I wondered where that mediation happens, and is it like an and when we understand duality, are we talking about in ontological terms or in our understanding phenomenology, like we experience duality, but do we also have to accept that there is a duality without human consciousness?
I think good question. I have to think on that. You are asking as if where is the place of that unification? Is it the being itself or is it the consciousness? How we will understand? If I try to answer that question departing from Hegel, probably I will say that there is no difference, it seems. At least Hegel will propose that thing, and he will say that we have no space as consciousness. Consciousness is something which is a level of being in itself. You understand what I'm saying? It belongs to that totality of truth. So this is why we cannot separate consciousness just a space for us, a space for representation of truth, because it is a truth in itself. If it represents representation, also is a truth in itself. Simply, probably he will say that. So this is why I will say that space is the truth itself, and truth is being and consciousness at the same time. For Hegel, this is so. For my position, I don't know what can I say. I have to think.
Because we talked about like how movement is like against against the infinite or like the absolute, like the absolute does not move. But then we talk about the absolute in motion without parting, and I mean, as a naive question, it is like only the consciousness is like being able to take up objects and think about things without not being consciousness. Like I think this is like what's interesting about Hegel and like how consciousness and subconsciousness arises. And I thought that maybe when we talk about Levinas, how we talk about other consciousnesses and God as both inheriting consciousness but also being beyond consciousness, and the problems of these two, and how these two different problems and how they follow one another in Levinas. Maybe I thought that it might have something about like thinking about something. It's about thinking and trying to linguistically capture what is out there, establishing ontological ground, at the same time establishing like phenomenological ground when we're thinking about something that is both out there but also is able to be apprehended, blah blah. So I thought that maybe like a term consciousness, I don't know how it relates to your presentation, and I would like to hear about like if you ever like.
So you are asking?
Where do you position consciousness in this like concept?
You are asking, can we take consciousness as a movement without parts?
Yeah, like consciousness, like how consciousness would be integrated into this dialogue that you presented here, like of like dualities and duality being annihilated at the end. Would consciousness have a part in it, like being able to understand something or attempting to understand something?
Probably, to some extent I am a Hegelian, so I am not sure what I am trying to say. Hegel will try to relate reason and consciousness with that power of separation to some extent. Power of separation, and that power is not just a how can I say? It's not spiritual, it is real. As if by thinking, by reason, by consciousness, we are really separating things. So this is why it is too near to the Geist itself, to the first spirit itself. As if the main principle which splits Geist into two somehow is related with that consciousness or with that reason. I don't know. So this is why reason is not a contingent, secondary, separated simple thing. It is a real power. It is really separated. So this is why, for example, in phenomenology you will find power and reason. Autonomy. Wasn't it so? Reason. So power and reason, and these two things somehow he tries to relate these two with each other. Understanding, power and understanding. So this is why I don't know. Maybe we can think in that way.
So the first structure in Hegel is different than the other ones, like the first separation of consciousness. Maybe there's something that looks similar to emergencies going on. Like the first consciousness arises from which like the other levels begin. Like That is like I don't know Hegel's logic and how does he put like these things in order.
And
Maybe
as you
there's
know, for example, yani, there is no difference between logic and the mechanism of being, for example. Hegel will try to equalize these two also at the same time. Yani, the process of reasoning is not different than the process of being, simply. He tries to equalize or relate all of that things. So this is why I don't know. But I don't know. Yeah, I hope I can say something. But not simple questions. What can I say? Lukman.
Çağdaş'a
No,
çalışıyor.
I don't have a question, hocam. I just want to
Okay.
have people waiting for class.
Another question or?
Hocam, the thing is, at 2, there is another, at 2, there is another event in this conference hall, so let's make it one to two
Bence
questions.
yeterince dağıttık zaten.
Okay, it's up to you. We just have 10 minutes left, that's all I have to
Okay,
say.
thank you, Faraja, and thank you too for your contribution to this talk. See you in next semester.